Welcome back to Wall Again, where passion meets music, and in this episode I'm going to be running through 10 more overrated bands as chosen by the viewers of Andy Edwards' channel. I did a video on his top 10 overrated bands before Christmas. It was very popular, so he released another video of 10 more overrated bands, but they were chosen by his viewers, so I decided, okay, I'm going to take those 10 and give my opinion on each of those bands. So we'll start off here. Tool was the first band he mentioned on the list. I think Tool get a lot of stick for being overly progressive for no real reason, but I don't think there's any doubt that Tool are fantastic musicians. They've got some brilliant stuff out there over the years, and apparently an exceptional live band. Their drummer, Danny Carey, I think his name is, he's considered one of the greatest drummers of all time, certainly in progressive rock. So yeah, I don't know, Tool being an overrated band, I can see where people are coming from, but I think it's probably more due to the fact that people don't understand their music maybe, and they might think that they're trying to be pretentious, but I don't think so. I think Tool are rated highly, and they should be rated highly. The next band he has on the list is a band that's very close to my heart. It's Pearl Jam. So he's basically saying on his podcast that Pearl Jam sound like an Americana band, and he met them once and he doesn't even remember meeting them. They were very boring, etc. But I actually think Pearl Jam are rightly rated as a highly band. Had a chance to see them last summer, and they were absolutely amazing. Eddie Vedder is still brilliant. He's such a fantastic frontman and showman, and then you've got a great band behind them. But I also played in a Pearl Jam tribute band, and I learned all the Mike McCready stuff for that particular gig, and I can tell you now that Pearl Jam are not an overrated band. They certainly have some complex stuff in there, stuff that's hard to get to grips with, different changes, chord sequences, odd chords, odd timings, all that good stuff. Pearl Jam were big into. So yeah, I would disagree with Andy on Pearl Jam, or should I say I disagree with Andy's viewers as well on Pearl Jam. I don't think Pearl Jam are an overrated band. Next band on the list are the Rolling Stones, and I have to agree, I think the Rolling Stones are definitely an overrated band. Their work from the 1960s and 1970s is quite good. There's definitely some very, very good stuff in there. But after that, they really go off the boil, 1980s, 90s, right up to now. I really don't think any material they've put out over the last 3 decades has stood up to what they had before. Now, in saying that, they are a good band, but I think they're rated so highly, and I don't think they live up to that rating. Now, I did see them a couple of years ago in Croke Park in Dublin, and I have to say, Mick Jagger was very, very good. Now, for his age, he was still very energetic and could still hold a note. A great frontman and a great showman. But I thought Keith Richards wasn't in the best of form, to be honest. He was hitting bum notes all over the place. Now, I know he has trouble with arthritis in his fingers and stuff, but essentially, like, you have Ron Wood there as well. He was actually quite good on the night, and Charlie Watts never put a foot or a hand wrong. But then they had like a whole host of backing musicians backing them up. So, you know, they sort of sell it as the Rolling Stones as 4 guys back at that time. This was before Charlie passed away. But like, they've got this massive ensemble behind them to really boost the music live. So I do think the Rolling Stones are overrated, to be honest. They're still a great band, but I just don't think they're as great as some people say they are. But it's great to see them still going at this age, a band from the 1960s. Coming in at number 7 on the list I have here, and they're not really ranked, is Prince. So, I can understand, again, I think a bit like Tool, Prince is a pop artist, whereas Tool were like a progressive kind of grunge artist. So people who are into Tool, they're into complex music, really appreciate Tool. But then there's people that are into pop music, they really appreciate Prince. And a lot of us rockers who really just want, you know, big drums and big guitar music, maybe Prince, his music can seem a bit light, and that's maybe why some people think he's overrated, because his songs, like, they're pop songs essentially. Okay, right? He does have guitar solos in there, and there is good instrumentation in a lot of his music, but people probably think he's a little bit too poppy, and that's why they think he's overrated. But I have to disagree with that. I think Prince is rated highly, and rightly so. He's a phenomenal musician. He can play all of the instruments: drums, bass, guitar, keys, synths, the whole lot, and a great guitar player as well. He played a solo of While My Guitar Gently Weeps for George Harrison. It was the George Harrison benefit concert, I believe, after he passed away. And he was absolutely fantastic on that. Now, look, he was fantastic, as in I don't think people were expecting him to play a guitar solo in that song, and he played it really well. He's no Eric Clapton, okay? There's no disputing that, but he's certainly a very accomplished guitar player, and that was a great performance, and I think that shocked and surprised a lot of people. So I think Prince is rated highly, and rightly so, to be honest. The next band on this list is AC/DC. So I think AC/DC probably are a bit overrated. Their songs are quite simple. They rely a lot on production and I suppose arrangement, as well as good hooks. So I know Chris Slade, who was a former drummer with AC/DC on the Razor's Edge album, he had said that AC/DC were essentially a pop band but with guitars and drums. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with all that. Certainly in the 1980s. Now, they don't sound like a pop band these days, but in the 1980s, I think they probably did sound like a pop band around that era. Like, we have to remember a lot of music coming out then. Well, I suppose more so the 70s than the 80s, but there was a lot of guitar music coming out there. So AC/DC were no big shock. I suppose these days, they definitely seem like a rock band because they've got heavy drums and heavy guitar. But back then, they probably weren't as heavy as other bands, and they don't really push the boundaries. AC/DC, they have a formula and they stick to it, and every album sounds very similar. So even though I love AC/DC and they have great hits, and Back in Black is one of my favourite albums of all time, I do think that they are overrated in terms of what they do, and I think it's because their music it's perceived as rock music, but it's very accessible to the masses, and that's why they're still selling out stadiums even to this day. They have a tour lined up for this year, and it seems that they're going to keep going anyway, and filling stadiums. And yeah, like, they're great. I saw them last summer live in Dublin, and I've also seen them many times before at Donington and many other times. But I think they are highly rated, to be honest, and maybe a little bit overrated, but still a great band. Okay, coming up next on the list is Led Zeppelin. I don't think Led Zeppelin are overrated. I think Led Zeppelin are rated highly, and rightly so. One of the best rock bands of all time. And I really don't know what to say. Anyone who thinks Led Zeppelin are overrated really needs to go and listen to the music and get into the deep cuts, listen through all the albums, and then come back and see what you think at that point. But I think anyone who knows anything about classic rock, anyone who plays guitar or drums in a rock band, any vocalists in rock bands, or even bassists, they will definitely think that Led Zeppelin are a great band and aren't overrated. They might not necessarily like the style of music, but they can't say that Led Zeppelin are overrated. I don't think they are at all. Next band on this list is the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And the Red Hot Chili Peppers started out as kind of a funk alternative rock band in Los Angeles in the 1980s. They had a few different drummers. Their guitar player passed away, and John Frusciante joined the band, and then they ended up releasing an album in 1991 called Blood Sugar Sex Magic. Now, that album went on to bring Red Hot Chili Peppers from as a kind of an underground band in Los Angeles, maybe with some minor hits through the late 1980s, into a mainstream band with songs like Under the Bridge, Give It Away, and songs like that. So I think they came from an underground scene, then they got really popular really fast. The mid-90s was tough for them. John Frusciante left the band, they brought in Dave Navarro, they released one album, kind of considered it a flop, even though there's some good stuff on it. And then towards the late 1990s, John Frusciante joined back into the band, and they released a string of very, very popular albums. Californication, By the Way, and then what's the one? Stadium Arcadium, I think it was called, in 2006. So those songs really turned Red Hot Chili Peppers into megastars. They were already a huge band in the 1990s, but then they became probably the biggest band in the world in the early 2000s. And I think when you consider the music they were playing, it wasn't overly complex. It was very simple song structures. It appealed to a mass audience, and I can see how music aficionados might look at them and say they're overrated. Like, people are saying that they're like the best band since Led Zeppelin or something, but they're not. And look, I get that. I can understand what people are saying, but when you see Red Hot Chili Peppers live, and I've been lucky enough to see them live 5 times, you can really appreciate the musicianship that this band have. They're a great jam band, they're a great live band. I don't think Anthony Kiedis is the best vocalist in the world, but I do think Red Hot Chili Peppers are a fantastic band, and I don't think they're overrated. I think they deserve their place in rock music history. The next band we come on to is U2. Again, another band I've seen many times over the years, and of course an Irish band. So yeah, I don't know, like U2, there's definitely elements of U2 that are overrated. There's no doubt about it. Like your standard pop rock fan will put U2 on a pedestal as if they are, like these phenomenal musicians and phenomenally gifted and great songwriters, etc. But I think their best material definitely came out in the 1980s and early 90s. Achtung Baby was a great album as well in the 1990s. And then they had a lot of questionable albums right up to around 2000, where they had All That You Can't Leave Behind, followed by How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. They were decent albums. And then they kind of dropped off again, and the last few albums have been really poor, to be honest. They've collaborated with Danger Mouse or Dead Mouse or one of those guys, and different songwriters and stuff, and music just sounds a bit like Coldplay now. It's not really a rock band anymore. They're just collaborating with other people to try and get their music out there and stay popular and stay relevant. So I can understand why people think U2 are overrated, but I think if you take their top 3 or 4 albums, say Achtung Baby, The Joshua Tree, Unforgettable Fire, I think they're not overrated. Like, those albums are amazing. The production is amazing, songwriting is great, and instrumentation is quite good as well. Like, there's nothing too complex with U2. They're not a progressive rock band. They're a pop rock band. But I don't think they're overrated. I think they probably deserve their place in the world. But certainly there's a lot of overrated albums in their back catalogue, shall we say. Okay, the next artist on the list is Bruce Springsteen. And again, I was lucky enough to see Bruce Springsteen play Croke Park last summer. And I can understand why people would say he's overrated. He's kind of, his background is in songwriting and folk music. Not really folk, but I suppose rock and roll. And he's come from that kind of background. His heroes would have been people like Bob Dylan and Tom Petty, people like that, people who are really focused on songwriting. And he's brought that to a band setup. So it's Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. Now, sometimes he releases albums with the band, and sometimes he releases albums without the band, with other musicians, or just acoustic himself. So he's had over 22 studio albums, and I have every one of them. And I explained that on a different video, if you've been watching my channel over the last week or so. But essentially, to say that Bruce Springsteen is overrated, it's a little bit similar to U2. A lot of his stuff is hit and miss. He's got a lot of albums in there that are very pedestrian and aren't very good, shall we say. And then he has great albums, like he's got Born to Run and Nebraska and Born in the USA, of course. My mind's gone a little bit blank now. But he does have a handful of outstanding albums, absolutely classic albums. And then there's a lot of filler albums in there, albums that aren't, up to that standard. So is he overrated? I think when you look at his live show, no, he does put on a great live show. And even at this age, he's still able to rock and put on a fantastic show. It's almost 3 hours long, which is phenomenal in this day and age. So I think he is probably rated highly, and rightly so. But I can understand why people would think he is overrated. But I think for what he does, there's no one better. So he's probably rated adequately, shall we say. Okay, and then the last band on this list is Oasis. Now, I think, first to say, Oasis were a huge impact on me growing up, because when I was growing up and starting to play guitar, Oasis were the biggest band in the world, or certainly in this part of the world, in Europe, Ireland, the UK. Oasis were huge, releasing, Definitely Maybe, followed by What's the Story, Morning Glory, and Be Here Now. They were 3 absolutely huge albums in the mid to late 1990s. So they had a massive impact on me, but then there was a lineup change. Bonehead and Gwigsy left the band, and they released a few more albums, and then Alan White left the band. And I think from Standing on the Shoulders onwards, there's a lot of questionable material on the albums. I think they were kind of falling apart for a long time before they actually called it a day. And I don't think those albums stand up to the first three, to be honest. I think the first three are head and shoulders above the rest of anything that they did. And I should actually mention that the Master Plan is a fantastic album, and it's all B-sides. So I think in the 1990s, they were not an overrated band. I think they were rated very highly, and they were a great band. Noel Gallagher, fantastic songwriter. The song structures, the melodies, everything, absolutely brilliant. And I got a chance to see them many times. I think I've seen them 5 times in total. So, and I saw them back in the day, like late 1990s, early 2000s, and they were a phenomenal band. They were a phenomenal band. But I think the later albums, they don't stand up to the earlier stuff, and I think that's maybe why people would perceive them as overrated. But they've reunited now. They're playing shows this year, and I'm lucky enough to have a ticket to the gig in Croke Park that Oasis are playing. And yeah, look, it's going to be them playing the hits and whatnot. And I know Liam's voice isn't there, but I'm looking forward to the gig. And yeah, I don't think Oasis, they're probably highly rated now, but I don't think they were highly rated or overrated, should I say, back in the 1990s. I think they were rated adequately. So that's my take on Andy Edwards' viewers list of overrated bands. There's not a lot of bands in there I think are that overrated. Some are a little bit overrated. And then obviously Led Zeppelin are not overrated at all in my opinion. But I hope you enjoyed my video. Let me know in the comments below. Give me 5 or 10 of the bands that you think are overrated. Would you agree with Andy's viewers? Would you agree with me? Would you agree with Andy? Love to hear your feedback on this, so please leave it in the comments. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, and if you could also subscribe, I would greatly appreciate that, and I will talk to you on the next one. Bye for now.